Hello, I'm Nigel Jones. I'm the electrical engineer responsible for the electronics in the Poseidon Mark VI Discovery rebreather. This is an electronically controlled rebreather, which means that everything that happens in here is basically controlled by electronics, with one or two exceptions. So my job here today is to explain to you what the various electronic components are and what they do. First of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been designing rebreathers now for almost 20 years, so I've learned quite a few things about what to do and what not to do, and hopefully you'll see the results of that experience as I explain what's going on here. This particular rig has 4 separate microprocessors in it. The first, and arguably the most important, we call the backpack processor, and that is located in here. The backpack processor is essentially responsible for keeping you alive. It does things like measure the oxygen in the control loop, fire solenoids, run decompression calculations, and so on. The second piece of electronics that you can see, and is very obvious here, is this guy. This is the battery. This rebreather contains a lithium-ion battery, which is rechargeable, but there's also a microprocessor in here. This microprocessor does basically 3 things. Your dive log is stored here, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that shortly. This also contains a loudspeaker for setting off an alarm, and it also contains some LEDs, very bright LEDs, which will go off under various alarm conditions. The third microprocessor on here is very small, and it's actually up here in the mouthpiece. We refer to this as the HUD, which is an acronym for Heads-Up Display. In this little tube here, as well as there being a microprocessor, there is an LED for giving a warning, a vibrator for also giving a warning, and 2 detectors such that when you switch the mouthpiece between open and closed positions, the electronics can detect which position the mouthpiece is in. This is very important from a control perspective, and I believe is something that is not seen on any other rebreather. The last piece of electronics is the display. The display electronics, well, displays everything. This is your primary means of interfacing to the unit. Also on here, on the back of this, is the wet switch. So you turn this rig on, basically by either dunking it in water, or if you're me, wet your fingers, touch the contacts, and the display will come on. Now, these 4 processors that are in the rig all communicate. They're all on a network, and they share information. This is very important because what happens on this rig is that the processing gets done where it needs to be done, and the information is sent where it needs to be seen or acted upon. Obviously, if this system is controlled by the electronics, one of the most important things that you want to know is, do the electronics work? Are all the systems working correctly? Well, the Mark VI has got extensive diagnostics built into it. When you first turn on the rig, it goes through 35 different pre-dive tests. These tests include things such as detecting that the backlight comes on and works correctly, the speaker sounds, all the LEDs come on properly, the various solenoids can fire and inject gas, and so on. Most importantly on this rig, it also does an automatic calibration of the oxygen sensors, such that you will have, before you go diving, you will know that those oxygen sensors are reading correctly. All right, let's talk about what happens during pre-dive. You come up to your rig, you turn it on like this, and as you can see, the display lights up, and then the various tests start. If you look at the display, you will see here the test number, and over here a timer showing how long is remaining on that test. The system goes through and tests just about everything, and as each test completes, it goes on to the next test number. If any test fails, then the test number will flash, and you have to take corrective action. Now, for instance, one of the things that might happen is it will say, you don't have any oxygen. Why not? Well, you may have forgotten to turn the oxygen cylinder on. So you would then go and turn it on, and the test would proceed. Some of the other things that it also checks are, for instance, that the oxygen solenoids can inject gas correctly. that the various alarms are working correctly, all the memories in the processors are correct, and so on. One of the last things it does, and arguably the most important of all, is it does an automatic calibration of the oxygen sensors. In this case, what it does is it injects air and then oxygen onto the oxygen sensors and checks that the readings are as expected. This is done fully automatically, and there is no room for user error. Okay, once all the pre-dive tests have passed, you are now ready to go diving. The system will sit there waiting for you to start your dive. You don the outfit and you enter the water. At that point, the control systems take over and do various things to make sure that your dive experience is as pleasant and uneventful as possible. One of the more important things in this rig, which is completely unique to the Poseidon Mark 6, is that we check that the oxygen sensors are reading correctly throughout the dive. And we do this principally by injecting gas onto these sensors at certain points during the dive. Because we know the composition of the gas and we know how deep you are, we know how those sensors should respond. This allows us to check that the oxygen sensors are indeed working correctly. Because obviously if they aren't, then bad things could happen. So, as well as checking that they work correctly in the range that we've calibrated for on the surface, 0 to 1 atmosphere of oxygen, we are also able to check that the oxygen sensors can read at higher levels of oxygen. Again, this is unique to this rebreather. Anyway, apart from that, during the dive, the system will keep track of all the various parameters in the system, will write into your data log, will give you information that you need to do things such as start ascending because you're starting to run out of gas, possibly start ascending because you're going to be entering into decompression shortly, and so on. So the question is, what would you typically see during a dive? Well, if you take a look at this display here, on the left-hand side shows the pressure in the diluent tank. On the right-hand side, this bar graph shows the pressure in the oxygen tank. Across the top is a bar graph showing your ascent rate. Up here, this shows you the partial pressure of oxygen in the breathing loop. It's displayed in atmospheres. Over here, it shows you your depth and your maximum depth and the water temperature. Over here, this number is rather interesting. This is your remaining dive time. And this is a combination of how long until you enter into decompression, how long until you run out of oxygen, how long until you run out of diluent, how long you run out of battery, and a few other parameters as well. So all those various parameters are just combined into one number, so you can look at that and say, I can dive for another 32 minutes. Finally, in the top right-hand corner is the alarm area. In here there are various alarm symbols that will light depending on the sort of problem that may or may not arise. For example, if you were to go into decompression, a symbol would come up there showing that you have a decompression ceiling. Okay. When you get ready to end your dive, you will come up slowly, hopefully, watching your display. And when you get to the surface, the system will detect that you've reached the surface. If you then go ahead and switch the mouthpiece into the open circuit position and depressurize your diluent cylinder, the system will realize that you are done diving and go ahead and initiate its shutdown procedure. At that point, the dive is ended. Now, what if you wanted to go ahead and look at your dive profile and other information from your dive? How do you do that? Well, the answer is very easily. If we take our display again, over here on the display, there is what's called an infrared transceiver. This allows you to talk to this unit using what's called an IRDA port, or Infrared Data Association port. Well, where do you find IRDA ports? Well, most laptop computers have them, but much more interestingly, so do most of these. If you have a smart telephone, then there's a very good chance this has an IRDA port, and so all you have to do is come along, turn on your telephone, start up our program, like this, point it at it, and extract your dive log. You can do that right there and then on the dive boat if you so wish. Of course, if you wish to take your rig home and do the same thing with your computer, you can also do that as well. you can update all the software in this rig through this infrared port. So as we here at Poseidon improve the software, we will be able to send you the software over the internet, and using this infrared port, you'll be able to update the software on your rig whenever we feel it's necessary to. Similarly, your dive logs and so on, as they're being extracted, if you so wish, you'll be able to upload those to Poseidon, so Poseidon can build a database of all their users' dives and learn from them accordingly.